Remember the little skit from SpongeBob SquarePants called Opposite Day? Well, if you don't, I got a link for you. But anyway, that's actually how they hide the ether. Let me explain. So, if you've seen my other videos, you remember that Einstein said space without ether is unthinkable, and he said that like 15 years after he had been thinking about it for 15 years, and then also you know that, but just a little bit afterwards, he had to hide relativity from the Nazis to make sure that they wouldn't get the bomb. Right. Well, the first step in keeping that nuclear secret, back then and now, is making sure nobody knows that there's two different versions of relativity: the ether version of relativity, where it started, and then opposite day relativity. I'll explain more in just a second. So, even though anybody who's interested in this subject knows there's tons of different interpretations of quantum mechanics, nobody remembers that there's two different versions of relativity that are mathematically equivalent. Because see, interpretation means you don't change the math, you just change what the math represents. So there's two different versions of relativity, and they made sure everybody did not know that, and still to this day, most people don't know it. Only a few historians know it. So why would they hide that there are two versions of relativity when they don't do that for quantum mechanics? Well, I'll explain it to you. Opposite day. There are three things that they say about relativity, and then they explain it in exactly the opposite terms. And this is really weird. Listen. What they say is the speed of light is constant. But then they explain that that actually varies according to your movement. If you go faster, it goes faster. If it were stationary, it would always stay like a certain distance from you, the way that they explain it. You go nearly the speed of light trying to catch up with it, well then light goes faster so that it's escaping from you at the speed of light. That's kind of the opposite of constant, isn't it? They say the speed of light is the same for all observers. And that makes perfect sense, right? But then they explain it's different for every observer, and two observers won't even agree on how far it's gone. A photon will be in a different place for two observers comparing their experience of the same photon in this opposite day relativity that we're taught. And then number three, they say that speed doesn't depend on the direction, but then they explain how Alice on the ground will be told by Bob on a rocket that the light has gone further than she thinks in front of the rocket and not as far behind the rocket. So what's crazy is that all of these, the common sense interpretation of the word works with ether relativity. It just doesn't work. It's exactly the opposite with this opposite day explanation. So why are they doing this game of opposite day? Partially, it's because if I try to explain the ether version of relativity to you, it's going to sound just like the other version. So what's the value in that? Well, if we start talking about experiments, then when the experiments prove relativity and pretend like there's only one, if we pretend like there's only one, then these experiments do prove that relativity is true. But they are actually proving the opposite day relativity that they explained to you false. Talk about a crazy shell game. So you use the same words and reinterpret them to say the opposite, then you get to treat experiments that prove you wrong as though they prove you right. And when anybody looks deep enough, it all looks like a bunch of nonsense. It is pure diabolical genius. And it worked to do exactly what it was that they wanted it to do. You may only be alive today specifically because this crazy nonsense plan worked. It made it so the Nazis threw the baby out with the bathwater. They decided that relativity was complete garbage. And they were wrong because they thought there was only one version of relativity, this nonsense opposite day game that they played. And it totally tricked them. They're like, oh, this is just crazy Jewish stuff or something. And so these assholes were tricked. And that's part of how we ended up getting the bomb before them. The whole shell game worked. It's pretty amazing. So the Nazis and all the German scientists are looking at this version of relativity, and then they're trying to look at the evidence. And it says, oh, well, stellar aberration proves relativity is true. But when you look closely, stellar aberration proves this opposite day version completely wrong. And then Fizeau experiment, well, it proves ether relativity true, but it proves the opposite day version wrong. And then the Sagnac experiment proves ether relativity true, but it proves opposite day relativity that we're all taught still today wrong. And so they claim all these things that prove their crazy version wrong as though it proves it right, because it does prove the ether version right. And it's crazy. It's just amazing. I mean, it's a great trick. It really is. But the problem with that is they still are doing it today. It's still carried on as a tradition to hide this as like a nuclear secret. So everybody's still taught the same crazy opposite day version, but the math isn't different. It's the same math as the ether version. So it works. The true genius is really in this weird way of like using opposite day to trick the Nazis and keep us all safe. But the problem is that what once was genius that saved the world is now a problem that could be contributing to the end of the world, because we could be solving problems with the energy crisis and the climate crisis, all of these things, if more people understood these secrets of physics. So be thankful to crotchety, mean old Squidward for inventing opposite day and fooling SpongeBob. Don't be SpongeBob and continue to think that opposite day is real.